Okay, so there are a few things I wanted to say to finish that off. The first is that the whole idea of the fall and Satan's this sort of Luciferian arrogance at being able to take your own decisions. I use that to explain the idea, but I don't think that it's a bad thing to take your own decisions in the face of external input from dreams, say. And in fact, I think that's part of the non-dual nature of the divine, of the amoral nature of it. That it's not all about making good decisions that lead towards good, but that in fact there is a non-dual and amoral mix between good and evil, where I think it's just as much an experience of life to strengthen your own will as an ego and your own ability to take your decisions as if your decisions were just as strong as these inputs given from the dreams, right? To, in fact, precisely make yourself into a god whose decision is just as worth listening to as these higher decisions given by synchronicity. I think there is also an aspect about that that's important. In fact, this amoral nature of the divine, I think, is probably also present in the way in which these, let's say, interventions get done, which is why the Eschaton gets represented as being the apocalypse in so many renditions of it, right? Because I don't think it's all about helping nicely, right? I think it's all about helping ultimately in the sort of individuation sense of it, that it's helping, again, in some weird way that doesn't completely clash with the amoral nature of it, despite its paradoxical nature. In some way, there is a good amongst this mix of good and evil, but it's a good that doesn't really make much sense. It's a good that doesn't really make any kind of rational sense. It's just a sort of, there's a certain maybe way in which going on the path of the self is a good thing. I don't know. In any case, so yeah, I think that there is a way also in which all of this picture isn't a sort of a fairy tale like picture of, like, you know, you're always being helped. In fact, I think that the way in which we personalize these forces and call them people, right? I was speaking in the other video of how it's as if the intensity of synchronicity kind of proves itself to be alive. I mean that in some sense that doesn't necessarily imply that the wave function breaks down into one or the other. It doesn't feel as if it's either a person or some sort of a mechanism. And in that sense, the myth of, you know, of gods and humans interacting remain myths. They are simultaneously almost literal depictions of certain things, and at the same time they are nothing more than myths in that they serve a purpose, they explain something, they are a story. There's a power to stories in that sense, in that they, any kind of story, if it resonates in the way that a synchronicity resonates, the meaning, the sense of something being meaningful, tells of something deeper. And I suppose the other thing I wanted to quickly address, although I don't think I'll go into it, is the whole topic of the Eschaton being historical. So the image I've been giving is that of history going through these weird linear waves, right? Almost as in the Hindu cycles, as I said at the end of the last video, that you go through this cycle of awareness and then unawareness, and this sort of yin-yang cycle. I think that in itself is also just a myth. I don't think it's as simplistic as a black and white kind of wave. And the reason for that not being that way is because of the atemporal nature of the eschaton, or of the apocalypse, which is that these moments of awareness, let's say at the top of the wave, and in the moments of unawareness at the bottom, the moments of awareness break the timeline. And so it breaks all sorts of things by breaking the timeline. It breaks your separation from the collective. It breaks the dream world's separation from the waking world in ways that render all of these things, such as me, time, dreams, all of these words become words in the apocalypse, I think. They become, and I'm saying this simply because I think that again, this is my hunch, that what we call the apocalypse is sort of like a myth to talk about the, how do I call it? The sync experience at an intense level, so that at a microscopic level, the sync experience, I think, gives a mythological version of this. It's all sort of mythological at some point. It's like when, again, I think that the psychedelic analogy is good, because it's as if at the peak of a mushroom trip, for example, words that refer to history, so yesterday and tomorrow, and even words that refer to space in the way we understand it, like inside and outside, become words more than ever. They become words. And so from that perspective, there hasn't been a linear progression towards the apocalypse, right? From our perspective, it's as if there is a timeline, and then at some point in the timeline, this thing happens. But from the perspective of this thing, all of these words like yesterday, April, May, Tuesday, all of these words become words. They all become symbols in a big myth that suggests that actually there was no timeline in some sense. And of course, and that's the spooky thing about it, right? That it operates at both levels at once, it seems. Because there's nothing less real about this linear egoic level. It's just as real. There is a way in which the timeline moves towards a point, and then there is this other level in which the moving of the timeline is but a symbol in the eyes of eternity, or something like that. So those were the two things I wanted to address. The amorality of it. I don't think that it's bad to do this and good to do the other. But the myth takes that language, usually. And also the atemporality of it. That the myth, again, takes this temporal language, but I think that it also has an atemporal dimension to it. So that's the kind of thing, right? That the moral is just as real. There is a moral side to it, but it gets balanced out alchemically with an amoral side, and there is a temporal side to it, a historical side to it, that gets balanced out with an ahistorical, atemporal kind of side. Yeah, that's about it. Anyway, thanks for listening.